At 57, I reflect on 26 years of blissful marriage to my sweetheart Lucy. She was more than a wife. She was my friend from college. Our connection spanned a decade before we married. 2 years of friendship followed by a year of courtship, culminating in a lifetime of cherished memories. Circumstances dictated that we live apart in different cities for a period. But despite the distance and time apart, Lucy and I maintained a strong bond. She was my loving wife, the mother of my children, and my dearest confidant from those carefree college days. She understood me implicitly, which made her recent betrayal all the more devastating. Just last week, we attended our college alumni reunion, an annual event celebrating our graduation 35 years ago. It's a grand affair, featuring renowned singers and celebrities, and is eagerly anticipated by all. This year offered a chance to reconnect with old friends and see how life had treated our classmates. Lucy and I were especially excited, as we were one of the few couples who had found love in college and remained together. We arrived brimming with pride, ready to celebrate our enduring relationship. Little did I know this excitement would be so cruelly misplaced. We reveled in catching up with dear friends after so many years. The atmosphere buzzed with lively conversation and laughter. We were experiencing what felt like peak happiness. But our joy was short-lived, interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face. We'll call him Rick. He was a classmate who had always held a torch for Lucy. She attracted many admirers with her intelligence and charm, and I wasn't the only one captivated by her. However, Rick's pursuit was different. It was marked by a sincerity that transcended mere flirtation. Despite Lucy's clear lack of interest, Rick was determined to win her affections. He persistently pursued her throughout college, even after learning about our relationship and her love for me. I remained confident, unconcerned by his advances, secure in the strength of our bond. Rick, like everyone else, knew Lucy was exceptional, yet he persisted. I vividly recall the day Rick learned Lucy had chosen to marry me. He approached me with a text message claiming she had made a grave error, and implying I couldn't possibly cherish her as profoundly as he believed he could. Lucy and I found his youthful idealism and presumption rather amusing at the time. We laughed off that earlier incident with Rick, and our paths hadn't crossed again. We'd heard nothing from him, assuming he'd moved on. After all, 35 years had passed since college, and we'd been happily married for 26 of them. Imagine our surprise when, at the reunion, Rick reappeared, seemingly fixated on that bygone chapter of his life involving Lucy. He greeted us with a warm embrace, which we reciprocated, although Lucy, visibly unsettled by his intense gaze, opted for a handshake. Rick took a seat across from us, and his unusually intense stare drew the attention of everyone in the room. Trying to break the tension, I asked if he'd brought his family to the reunion. To my surprise, he revealed that he'd been briefly married at 40 but was currently single. He admitted his marriage had ended in divorce, and I offered my condolences. His response, however, was laced with unexpected bitterness. "Well, you should be sorry. After all, you stole my love." This ludicrous statement was punctuated by hysterical laughter. In my younger days, such a provocation might have led to a confrontation, but approaching 60, such trivial matters hold less weight. Rick, never one to be intimidated, simply shrugged off his comment. He was the type of guy who wouldn't be picked for a sports team, a brash talker whose jokes often missed the mark. Although everyone heard his insensitive remark, no one reacted, and a palpable awkwardness settled over the room. Trying to defuse the situation, we collectively chose to ignore him. While it was clear Lucy was particularly affected by his words, her silence spoke volumes. Nancy, our close friend from college, recognized Lucy's distress and took her aside. We tried to lift her spirits, advising her to disregard the behavior of someone so obviously obsessed and to enjoy the rest of the evening in peace. Knowing Lucy's tendency to overthink, we offered comfort, hoping to bring back her smile. As we tried to help Lucy recover and regain her composure, Rick, having apparently overheard our conversation, approached us again. To our astonishment, he apologized, claiming he hadn't meant to upset Lucy. On the contrary, he wanted to remind her that she still had an admirer, despite the passage of time and its supposed impact on her appearance. I was outraged by his audacity, but managed to remain composed, firmly telling him to leave us alone. Rick, seemingly genuinely contrite, apologized again for the disturbance, and Lucy, with newfound resolve, firmly asked him to But Rick persisted, urging Lucy to forgive him so we could all enjoy the remaining moments of our final gathering. His words resonated with me, and I realized it was time to let go of the past. This evening marked the end of our reunions with these old friends and classmates, highlighting the futility of dwelling on bygone grievances. Recognizing this, Lucy embraced Rick, urging him to let go of their shared history and not to contact her again. With that, we headed to the dance floor, joined by others, and the atmosphere became festive and lighthearted. After a while, I noticed Nancy and Lucy in conversation, with Rick hovering nearby. He seemed to be talking animatedly, even dancing in a somewhat goofy manner. Despite this, I was relieved the earlier tension had dissipated, allowing us to reflect on our shared past in a more positive light. Throughout the evening, I kept a watchful eye on Lucy, gauging her mood. I couldn't help but notice Rick whispering something to her, but I hoped it was nothing to be concerned about. Lucy responded with a smile and a nod, which eased my worries. I reasoned their exchange was likely harmless. Lucy would have reprimanded him if it were otherwise. Feeling reassured, I relaxed and mingled with our friends. However, about an hour later, I realized Lucy and Nancy were missing. Initially, I wasn't too concerned, as we were all catching up with different people individually. But as time passed and they didn't return, I grew worried. I started actively searching for them, my concern escalating. I tried calling, but they didn't answer, likely due to the loud music. After about 30 minutes, Lucy finally reappeared, but something was amiss. While her appearance hadn't changed, her demeanor had. She was unusually quiet and reserved, and she kept urging me to leave. Nancy rejoined us, but for the rest of the evening, they didn't speak, maintaining an awkward silence. Seeing them avoid eye contact, I suspected they'd had a disagreement. I repeatedly asked Lucy why she seemed upset and wanted to leave early, but she remained silent. Despite wanting to stay until the end, Lucy's insistence forced us to cut the evening short. During the long drive home, Lucy remained quiet, and my concern for her well-being grew. I repeatedly inquired about her state, but she simply said she was tired and needed rest. I was anxious. Lucy, usually vibrant and energetic, seemed inexplicably distressed. Unsure of the cause, I finally asked if it had anything to do with Nancy. She curtly replied, no, offering no further explanation. Realizing she needed space, I gave her some privacy. Back home, while many of our former classmates happily shared photos and chatted about the reunion online, I couldn't shake a feeling of sadness, knowing this might be our last. Lucy quietly slipped into bed and closed her eyes, feigning sleep. Exhausted, I finally climbed into bed around 2 a.m. and drifted off. I hadn't been asleep long when Lucy woke me, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her close, stroking her back, asking if seeing old friends had stirred up difficult emotions. She remained silent, her tears flowing. Knowing words were inadequate, I held her tighter, offering silent support. When her tears finally subsided, she confessed something that left me reeling. She admitted she had cheated on me with Rick. I was speechless, paralyzed by the revelation. Images and thoughts from the previous evening flooded my mind. Lucy dancing with Rick and Nancy, the three of them forming an unlikely trio. Her grim expression upon returning, her insistence on leaving early, it all clicked into place. Nancy knew. That explained her own upset demeanor. Frozen in disbelief, I couldn't speak. Sensing my inner turmoil, Lucy finally revealed what had happened. While they were dancing, Rick began apologizing for putting her in an awkward position, especially after she had repeatedly rejected his advances. He then showered her with compliments, admiring her strength. Amidst the music and movement, Rick confessed that despite traveling the world, he'd never met anyone as extraordinary as Lucy. She admitted his sincerity had charmed her, and she enjoyed the attention. Captivated, she listened as he invited her for a walk, promising it would be their last meeting. He insisted she deserved to hear his true feelings, expressed in their purest form. Initially, Lucy declined, but he persisted, emphasizing it was a chance for him to share his genuine sentiments. Her curiosity piqued, she agreed to join him, wanting to hear what he had to say. Lucy went for a walk with Rick on the serene college campus, seeking a quiet spot away from the reunion. During their walk, Rick professed his enduring love for her. declaring her the most extraordinary woman he'd ever known. Their conversation meandered through various topics, but the underlying theme remained constant. Lucy admitted with a heavy heart that, influenced by alcohol, she had foolishly succumbed to his persuasive words. During their walk, Rick gently held her hands, a gesture that further complicated the situation and weighed heavily on Lucy's conscience. Tears welled in Lucy's eyes as she sought comfort in my embrace, sharing the painful details, recounting every intimate moment between her and Rick. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air, each word cutting deeper into my heart. She spared no detail, including the moment guilt abruptly halted their actions, compelling her to push him away. I felt utterly powerless, unable to respond to her desperate pleas for forgiveness. Trying to gather my thoughts, I asked Lucy for some time alone. Despite my request, she continued to cry and beg for forgiveness. In an effort to console her, I suggested she rest, promising we would discuss it in the morning. As she clung to me tightly, expressing her fear of losing our connection, I remained still, eyes closed, lost in thought. My mind replayed the events of the evening, meticulously examining each detail. Then, a specific moment stood out. Rick's unsettling, victorious smile when Lucy returned from their ill-fated meeting. At the time, I hadn't grasped its significance. Now, in hindsight, I recognized the triumph on his face, as if he had finally won her over. This realization flooded me with anger and disgust, overwhelming any self-pity. Sharing a bed with Lucy now felt unbearable. After watching her fall into a deep sleep, exhausted from hours of tearful sobbing, I quietly left the bed and hastily packed a backpack with my laptop, wallet, and other essentials. The weight of my emotions was heavier than any physical burden as I made the agonizing decision to leave our home. Despite everything, I couldn't deny the truth. I still loved her. After 26 years of marriage, I couldn't imagine life without her. Our marriage had given us a wonderful family, filled with love and cherished memories. But despite our strong bond, I knew I couldn't stay. Lucy knew me too well. Her persuasiveness would likely have prevented my departure if I'd stayed until morning. I sought refuge in a hotel and took the necessary steps to block her number and remove her from all social media. Exhaustion finally caught up with me as the sun rose, and I fell into a deep sleep. By 8:00 a.m., my phone was ringing incessantly with calls from our children, completely unaware of the events that had shattered their parents' world. Lucy and I have 2 children, a 24-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both attending college on the same campus. Reflecting on that fateful night, I now understand that my impulsive decision to leave Lucy needed careful consideration. Pretending normalcy after her betrayal was impossible. She was my best friend, the core of my soulmate. Trying to act or deceive her would have been futile. She knew me better than anyone. The possibility of Lucy's infidelity had never crossed my mind, so I hadn't formulated a plan for such a devastating scenario. When the children started calling, I was caught off guard, unsure how to respond to the truth that had fractured our family. Realizing I needed to speak to at least one of my children before proceeding, I called my son, who typically handled situations with more calmness and maturity. With a heavy heart, I informed him that his mother had cheated on me the previous night with someone from her past, an old admirer, perhaps even a stalker. I explained that I needed time to process everything and figure out my next steps. The revelation shocked him to the core. The idea of his mother behaving this way was incomprehensible, making the situation even more painful. Our family had always been known for its strength and love. We'd always prided ourselves on our close bond. Our children, relatives, and friends admired our relationship. Now, all of that had been shattered by Lucy's actions. My son struggled to accept that his mother was capable of such behavior, insisting there must be some misunderstanding. Desperate for answers, he pressed me for details, trying to understand how and why this had happened. Recognizing the emotional toll this was taking on him, I understood that providing a detailed chronological account would only intensify his pain and potentially hinder his ability to move forward. With a heavy heart, I acknowledged the gravity of the situation, expressing my sincere hope that it was all an elaborate joke. Sadly, I had to confirm that his mother had indeed confessed to her infidelity. Although he was 24 and had experienced heartbreak before, this betrayal hit him hard. Seeking his understanding and trust, I asked him to keep this information confidential until I was ready to share it more broadly. And to diffuse the situation and avoid further questions, I told my daughter I was going away on a business trip for a while due to work-related stress. The calls stopped. My daughter believed I'd left for work. My son and Lucy knew the truth of our separation. In the following days, I immersed myself in online research, seeking reputable lawyers and solutions to our predicament. I stumbled upon a subreddit where men shared similar experiences. As I delved into these online discussions, I encountered stories of revenge against unfaithful partners. While I understood their anger, I couldn't fathom seeking revenge on Lucy. My love for her, however painful, remained. To deny that would be dishonest. But despite this lingering love, I knew we could never be together again. Trust had been irrevocably shattered, and reconciliation seemed impossible. Our paths had diverged. I wrestled with how to navigate this challenging situation, unsure if I could overcome it. There were so many things demanding my attention: work, the well-being of our children, property issues, and more. The next day, I had a crucial meeting with a lawyer to discuss the legal aspects. Lucy and I are both management consultants, but in our early 40s, we left our stable jobs. Lucy pursued her passion for writing, while I became a business consultant, primarily working with startups. As a self-employed consultant, I don't have a fixed workplace. This led me to consider the possibility of Lucy showing up at my office. After careful consideration, I realized that given my work situation, it might not be easy for her to locate me. Although I occasionally work from home, I also visit clients' offices, and working with multiple clients simultaneously makes it challenging to maintain complete anonymity. Nonetheless, Lucy hadn't managed to track me down. Approaching 60, we had been contemplating retirement. We'd put considerable effort into planning our future, including saving to buy a beachfront home in the countryside. We aimed to make this purchase next year and had already identified potential properties. Fortunately, we hadn't finalized the purchase and were still negotiating. In hindsight, I'm incredibly grateful for this. If we had already bought the property, the situation would have been far more complicated. The thought alone is daunting. Meanwhile, Lucy had been persistently trying to contact me. My lawyer advised me to inform our adult children about our separation. He also raised questions about property division. Initially, I considered splitting it equally, but upon reflection, I decided against using it as leverage. Instead of seeking revenge, I believed Lucy deserved her rightful half. She had contributed equally. However, I also recognized that she deserved the separation she seemed to be seeking. Knowing Lucy for so long, I understood she might be willing to relinquish her share of the property to reconcile and save our family. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I arranged a meeting with our children. I asked my son to discreetly bring my sister to a restaurant without revealing my presence. My daughter's reaction upon seeing me was intense. She bombarded me with questions, including whether I had cheated on her mother after disappearing from their lives. Seeing her distress, my heart sank, but I knew I had to remain calm for the sake of the children and the upcoming revelations. Gradually, I reassured her that I hadn't been involved with anyone else. Then, cautiously, I began revealing the truth, piece by piece. My son clearly already knew some of it, but my daughter was hearing the full story for the first time. Neither of them was prepared. My daughter's world crumbled when she learned about her mother's infidelity. For the past 15 days since I'd left home, she had been staying with Lucy. Overwhelmed with emotion, she embraced me tightly, tearfully apologizing for any ill feelings she had harbored. In a vulnerable moment, both children pleaded with me to reconsider the divorce, but I remained firm. It was incredibly difficult to see them cry, but they understood the depth of my pain and the importance of prioritizing their own well-being. They pledged their support. I assured them that the decision to separate was solely between their mother and me and wouldn't affect our love and support for them. My daughter expressed concern for Lucy's well-being, explaining that she was struggling to eat and sleep. She described Lucy's fluctuating state, from crying spells to restlessness, and her incessant calls to me, desperately searching for me at my clients' offices. Each client informed her I hadn't been there for the past 2 weeks. Sensing her mother's anxiety, my daughter bravely, to diffuse the situation and avoid further questions, I told my daughter I'd be away on a business trip due to work-related stress. The calls stopped. My daughter believed I'd left for work. My son and Lucy knew the truth. In the following days, I researched top lawyers and solutions to our situation. I found an online forum where men shared similar experiences. Some discussed revenge, but I couldn't fathom that. My love for Lucy remained, though I knew we could never be together again. Trust was irrevocably broken. Numerous matters demanded my attention. Work, our children, property. I met with a lawyer. Lucy and I are both management consultants, but we'd left our stable jobs in our early 40s. She pursued writing. I became a consultant, primarily for startups. My lack of a fixed office made me consider the possibility of Lucy showing up at my workplace. Given my work style, it wasn't easy to track me down. Approaching 60, we'd been planning retirement, including buying a beachfront home. Thankfully, we hadn't finalized the purchase. Lucy persistently tried to contact me. My lawyer advised informing our children about the separation and raised questions about property division. I initially considered splitting everything equally, but decided against using it as leverage. Lucy deserved her half. Knowing her, I suspected she might even relinquish her share to reconcile. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I arranged a meeting with our children. My son discreetly brought my sister to a restaurant without revealing my presence. My daughter's reaction was intense. She demanded to know if I had cheated, having disappeared from their lives. I reassured her and cautiously revealed the truth. My son already knew some of it, but my daughter didn't. Neither was prepared. Learning about her mother's infidelity devastated my daughter. She'd been staying with Lucy for the past 15 days. Overwhelmed, she embraced me, apologizing for any ill feelings. Both children pleaded for reconciliation, but I remained firm. It was hard to see them cry, but they understood my pain. They pledged their support. I assured them the separation wouldn't affect my love for them. My daughter voiced concern for Lucy, who was struggling to eat and sleep, fluctuating between crying and restlessness, and constantly calling me, even searching for me at my clients' offices. Sensing her mother's anxiety, my daughter bravely asked Lucy if something was wrong. Lucy remained silent, tears streaming down her face. My daughter retreated to her room, overwhelmed with sadness. Recognizing the emotional toll on our children, I asked my daughter to stay home and support her mother. As we discussed Lucy's actions, I felt our children's sadness shift to anger. They too felt betrayed. We were all victims, but the blame for the destruction of our family rested solely on Lucy. Despite the pain, I didn't want our children to harbor hatred for their mother. I urged them to support her. A few days later, Rick messaged me, inquiring about Lucy's well-being and brazenly stating that if I was divorcing her because of her infidelity, he was ready to step in. I replied that Lucy was a free woman and blocked him. His message didn't anger me. I wasn't married to him, didn't love him, and didn't trust him. My deep connection was with Lucy, which made her betrayal so profound. The divorce papers were to be delivered that day. I awaited my daughter's call, anticipating Lucy's reaction. I had much to address: property division, retirement, my children's well-being. Time passed. The divorce was finalized. Receiving the papers shattered Lucy's illusion of my temporary anger. The reality hit her hard. She'd believed we would reconcile. She desperately requested a meeting before signing, convinced she could persuade me. She was probably right, but I stood firm, prioritizing my well-being. Conflicting emotions overwhelmed me. I still loved her, and it pained me to see her deteriorating, but I couldn't ignore the damage to our family and my self-respect. She had taken me for granted, destroying the foundation of our love. As much as I wanted to save her from herself, I couldn't continue living in such a toxic environment. My daughter informed me that Lucy had been hospitalized for depression, the financial burden of her actions falling on her shoulders. This reinforced my conviction that I'd made the right decision. Lucy's refusal to take medication worsened her condition, necessitating a liquid diet. Some might view my apparent indifference to her health as ruthless and selfish, questioning my love for her. But without experiencing such profound betrayal, it's hard to grasp my suffering. My love for Lucy was more than adoration. I cherished her, worshipped her. She was my soulmate for nearly 3 decades. Rick was right in a way. A woman like Lucy is rare, with her intelligence, talent, and empathy. I tried to cherish her, but her actions betrayed that love and trust. It's not insecurity that troubles me, but the emotional aftermath. If she wants to be with Rick, so be it. If she wishes to continue her relationship with Rick didn't concern me. The divorce papers were being delivered that day. I awaited my daughter's call to learn Lucy's reaction. I had pressing matters to address: property division, retirement, my children's well-being. Surprisingly, Nancy didn't seem surprised by the separation. She claimed to already know why and, curious, called me for details. I told her about Lucy's confession. Nancy apologized, saying she had warned Lucy about Rick and advised against spending time alone with him. Lucy had ignored her. Nancy then shared a different version of the story. According to her, she and Lucy were dancing when Rick joined them and began making advances, whispering in Lucy's ear. This contradicted Lucy's claim that it was an apology. Nancy's account cast suspicion on Rick's intentions and Lucy's involvement. Nancy had tried to intervene, noticing a change in Lucy's behavior. To her surprise, Lucy seemed to enjoy talking to Rick. When Rick suggested a walk, Lucy asked Nancy for advice. Nancy strongly opposed it, citing Rick's reputation. Lucy went anyway. Preoccupied with friends, Nancy hadn't immediately noticed Lucy's absence. Growing worried, she searched for Lucy and found her with Rick in the college pool locker room, not on the lawn as Lucy had claimed. Nancy interrupted them, revealing that her presence, not Lucy's conscience, had stopped them. Despite the betrayal, I felt a flicker of pride in Lucy for confessing. Knowing the truth brought some comfort, but the betrayal still stung. I'd initially believed her excuse about intoxication, but now I realized it was a conscious choice. The location, the pool locker room, far from the reunion, emphasized the deliberate nature of their encounter. After hearing Nancy's account, I questioned whether I could forgive Lucy. Her deception, compounded by the differing versions, left me reeling. Meanwhile, my children shared alarming news about Lucy's deteriorating mental state, bordering on self-harm. I turned to Nancy for support, explaining the discrepancies in Lucy's story. I asked Nancy to visit Lucy and have an honest conversation, informing her that I knew the truth and wouldn't reconcile. I suspected Lucy's self-harm was a ploy for reconciliation, but her well-being was paramount. Nancy visited Lucy and updated me. Lucy was on the path to recovery and had signed the divorce papers, which brought some relief. Motivated, I wrapped up my work commitments. Instead of settling down as planned, I decided to embark on a solo journey, seeking new experiences and freedom. I may not have handled everything perfectly, but I did my best. A year passed. Time had moved slowly. After leaving our home, I stayed in a hotel for a few months, then rented an apartment. The divorce proceeded as planned. I continued working, but switched to clients allowing me to work from home full-time. Lucy received 50% of our retirement savings. It was difficult, but I believed in a fair split. I divided my remaining 50% between our children. Lucy continued therapy. Nancy stayed in touch with her and occasionally inquired about my well-being. During a conversation with Nancy, she shared some unexpected information about Lucy. It's crucial to approach this cautiously, as Nancy still supports Lucy, but I'm open to hearing her perspective. It turns out there's reason to question how well I knew Lucy. I'd always considered her strong and determined, but it seems loneliness may have influenced her decisions. Apparently, Lucy and Rick had reconnected, and their relationship seemed to flourish until he learned about our impending divorce. Then, his behavior changed. He distanced himself, leaving Lucy confused and heartbroken. Despite her reminders of his earlier professions of love, he claimed he'd only wanted a casual encounter, admitting he didn't want a serious relationship or marriage. This revelation shattered Lucy's perception of Rick's intentions. Their connection seemed built on fleeting desires, not genuine affection. It's hard to fathom that Lucy begged Rick for a relationship, especially given his reputation. His true colors showed when he admitted wanting only a physical relationship, dismissing Lucy's emotional needs. He even mentioned being content with his roommate. All his apparent love and admiration was a facade, leaving Lucy feeling deceived and insulted. He even boasted about outsmarting her. This revelation deeply unsettled Lucy, making her realize she'd fallen for his manipulations. A couple of weeks ago, I received an update on Lucy. My daughter had been living with her, providing companionship and support during her depression. However, after a year, my daughter reached her limit. Lucy's behavioral changes had become unbearable. Once emotionally strong, she'd become consumed by self-doubt and a constant need for attention, unpredictable and unstable. Despite my daughter's efforts, living with Lucy had become impossible. This highlighted the devastating impact of her actions on her well-being. Lucy's mental state deteriorated further, marked by delirium and confusion. She'd become controlling and possessive, bombarding my children with calls. Whenever my daughter addressed Lucy's behavior, Lucy became distressed, fearing abandonment. My departure had terrified her, and my children assured her they wouldn't leave. They did everything they could to help her depression, but her controlling tendencies were pushing them away. Lucy frequently argued with them, accusing them of not supporting her. This behavior was alien to us. The children were shocked. Ultimately, a heated argument ensued, making it clear that Lucy's actions had disrupted everyone's lives. Our once joyful family had become fragmented and distorted. It was hard for Lucy to accept that her own children held her responsible. 2 weeks ago, my daughter moved out, explaining that she'd done all she could but couldn't put her life on hold. I believe her decision was reasonable. She needs to move forward, and Lucy needs to take responsibility for her life. While someone my age might find satisfaction in seeing their unfaithful ex-wife suffer, I felt only sadness for Lucy. Her poor decisions had caused immense suffering, and I genuinely hoped she could recover. Over the past year, I've traveled to 4 different countries, experiencing diverse cultures and lifestyles. Initially disappointed to deviate from my retirement plan with Lucy, I came to appreciate the opportunity for new experiences. I met incredible people. I'm not currently in a relationship, nor am I actively seeking one. I'm open to whatever the future holds. The last 2.5 years have been uneventful, except for extensive travels and rekindling my passion for painting. Last month, I reunited with Lucy after a 4-year gap for our son's wedding. He wanted us to meet the bride's parents. At first, I was hesitant, suggesting we meet at the wedding itself, but I agreed to accompany Lucy to this important event. It wasn't about me, but my duty as a father. A week before the wedding, the bride's parents hosted a dinner for us. I'd initially declined, but decided to attend at the last minute. Seeing Lucy was emotionally challenging. I would have preferred a private meeting, but I needed to be there for my son. Both he and his fiancée were thrilled to see me. Her parents were kind and hospitable. I connected immediately with her father, and we had a great conversation about his business, but I'll focus on Lucy. Upon entering, I noticed Lucy seemed visibly uneasy. Something had changed in her eyes. She wasn't the woman I once knew. She smiled politely, but there was tension. Despite the years, she still had her characteristic long hair, but 4 years had taken a toll. At the table, it turned out my son hadn't disclosed the nature of our past relationship to the bride's parents. This was the first meeting for both sets of parents. Lucy was initially quiet, but when we had a moment alone, she commented on my appearance, noting I looked healthier. I agreed, mentioning I'd removed all toxic elements from my life. This surprised her. She discreetly glanced around, then inquired about my romantic life. I deflected, stating it shouldn't concern her. I engaged with the other guests, avoiding focusing on her. As the evening ended, I embraced everyone. To Lucy, I simply nodded and casually said goodbye. This startled her. The exchange, though brief, likely appeared awkward to the others. The meeting with Lucy was surprisingly straightforward. She seemed startled by my presence or too uncomfortable for open conversation. I wasn't interested in delving deeper and departed. My son walked me out, inviting me to stay with him for a few days. I declined but promised to call. I headed to my hotel. I no longer have a fixed residence. I travel frequently and stay in hotels. Transitioning to a nomadic lifestyle after 26 years as a family man wasn't easy, but I've grown accustomed to it and enjoy the freedom. I have some more news. I have a life partner. 2 years ago in Tokyo, I met Ashlyn, a 52-year-old woman who'd recently left an abusive relationship and embarked on her first solo trip. We met while hiking and connected. Neither of us sought romance, so we developed a deep friendship. I was headed to South Korea. She was going to Thailand. We continued communicating, nurturing our friendship. Recognizing our compatibility, we decided to plan future adventures together. Over the past 1.5 years, We've explored over 8 countries as travel companions, prioritizing our bond over rushing into romance. For the first 2 months, we remained platonic. My children knew about Ashlyn but hadn't told Lucy, fearing it might trigger her depression. At the hotel, I called my son to explain why I couldn't stay with him. I told him Ashlyn was with me and it wouldn't be fair to leave her alone. I also expressed my desire for Ashlyn to attend the wedding as my partner. My son liked the idea but worried about Lucy's reaction. I insisted, emphasizing Ashlyn's importance and my desire for her to meet my family. I suggested he discuss it with my daughter. Thankfully, she supported my decision and agreed to inform Lucy about Ashlyn. My daughter also warned me that Lucy might react negatively, potentially causing a scene at the wedding. I reassured her, saying I was prepared for any scenario and would handle it maturely. The wedding day arrived filled with joy and celebration. Ashlyn looked stunning in her elegant dress, and I felt incredibly proud to have her by my side. We greeted guests and I introduced Ashlyn to my relatives and close friends. Everyone welcomed her warmly. However, when Lucy arrived, the atmosphere shifted. She appeared tense and avoided making eye contact with me. I noticed she kept glancing at Ashlyn, her expression a mixture of curiosity and resentment. During the reception, Lucy approached me, asking about Ashlyn. I calmly explained that Ashlyn was my partner and that we were deeply committed to each other. Lucy listened intently, her face betraying a mix of emotions: sadness, anger, perhaps even regret. She didn't make a scene, however, and for that, I was grateful. The rest of the wedding proceeded smoothly. Ashlyn and I enjoyed celebrating with my son and his new wife. It felt like a new chapter in my life, filled with hope and happiness. While the encounter with Lucy was emotionally charged, it also brought a sense of closure. I realized that my past with Lucy was truly behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future with Ashlyn by my side. State of mental breakdown, Lucy ran onto the road and was struck by a motorcyclist who couldn't react in time to avoid the collision. Lucy, the love of my life and the mother of my children, passed away instantly. It's really difficult for me to talk about it. Her body was terribly injured, resembling a disassembled doll. While I might blame myself for insisting on bringing my new partner to my son's wedding, we couldn't have continued to endure Lucy's manipulations for the rest of our lives. It all began with her betrayal, and no one is at fault for the path she chose. Her deteriorated further after our separation. She would have blamed me regardless of our decision to attend the wedding. I can only reflect on the fact that she was a troubled soul. A few days ago, I received a sympathy card bearing Nancy's name and handwriting. My children and I appreciate Nancy's kindness, and we will always value her friendship. She mentioned that Lucy's memorial service would be held soon, but I don't think I'll attend. The pain is still too raw, and the memories of that dreadful day continue to haunt me. My children have made it clear that they don't want any contact with me for the time being, so as to avoid confrontations during such a challenging time. I've been living in a hotel since the day of the tragedy, and I don't think I'll stay here for much longer. I'm contemplating a change of environment, a fresh start, as they say. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm not ready to give up on life. This unforeseen tragedy has shattered my world, and I can't go back to what it was. I feel I've lost everything: the love of my life, my companion, my friend, and above all, the mother of my children. The last 4 years without her have been tough, and I find it hard to believe that she's gone forever. She left a void in our lives that can never be filled. The worst part is that I can't share my sorrow and grief with my children due to their fears for their own safety. It's an unfortunate situation, but I respect their stance nonetheless. My heart aches for them. All I can do is be there for them when they're ready. My life has been filled with ups and downs over the past few years. Divorce, separation, no reconciliation, the wedding, the tragedy, and now I'm faced with mourning alone. In time, I'm sure my children will reach out when they're ready. Until then, I can only wait and remember Lucy. I'll cherish the good times and try to move forward with my life while bearing the heavy burden of the past in my heart forever. Goodbye, Lucy. You will always be remembered. In an attempt to make amends with Iceland on Lucy's behalf, I expressed my admiration for my daughter's resilience, referring to her as my soldier. Iceland embraced us warmly, and when I used that term, she became visibly emotional. While Lucy's actions had caused pain to those around her, she had always expected compassion and support from her friends. Over the years, due to circumstances, my children lacked a stable family environment for special occasions. and I acknowledged my part in this. Throughout the remainder of the wedding, Lucy grew increasingly upset by our children's support for me. She often distanced herself, standing alone in corners or sitting by herself, appearing more isolated than a mother should at such an event. Her sense of isolation was further highlighted by her decision not to participate in the family photo. Recently, Nancy contacted me to express Lucy's distress over the fact that I was moving on with my life while she felt lonely. In response, I explained to Nancy that my children and I had reached a point where we could no longer tolerate Lucy's constant drama. I emphasized that Lucy had her own path and was free to live as she chose. My priority now is to enjoy the remainder of my years in peace. I am considering relocating to be closer to my children and taking responsibility for their family gatherings, even though they are adults. I believe it would provide them with a comforting and stable environment where they could come together when needed. The recent wedding made me realize that a new phase of life is approaching, where I may become a grandparent. I don't feel compelled to inform Lucy of this, and I am at peace with that decision. When the time comes, I will consider whether Iceland wants to join me on this journey. Nancy also informed me that Lucy's condition has deteriorated, including inappropriate behavior and panic attacks. I asked Nancy to provide support to Lucy and promised to reach out to my daughter to assist her. However, since Lucy was away, Nancy was unable to stay with her for an extended period, and Lucy was left alone in the house in a vulnerable state. Tragically, before the next day dawned, my children and I received devastating news. In a state of mental distress, Lucy ran onto the road and was struck by a motorcyclist who was unable to react in time to avoid a collision. Lucy, the love of my life, and the mother of my children passed away instantly. It is difficult for me to discuss the aftermath. Her body was severely injured, resembling a broken doll. While I may question my decision to bring my new partner to my son's wedding, I know we could no longer endure Lucy's manipulations. It all began with her betrayal, and ultimately, no one can be blamed for the path she chose.